So back here at Livestream Central, the call to specieshood is something that continues to reverberate.
Right. So one of the ways to frame specieshood is to start with the individual. And here we sit as two separate individual people, and that seems very clear. You have an identity, a body, ideas, thoughts, feelings, etc. And I do also. And there's a sense of separateness on that level. As we start talking together about our experiences, our personal experiences, all of a sudden that very stark difference between us starts changing a bit. So, if we're talking together and, for instance, we start talking about the last time I really got angry, and I talk a little bit about that, and it may be, a situation that's totally different than the last time you got angry. But yet, if we talk a little bit about the anger, it's like, oh yeah, it's like there's a similarity to that. I think of the old kind of slang word for anger was getting your jaws tight. Mm-hmm. And you think about anger, and it's you can relate to that. And I say that, you immediately know what I'm talking about. Or we could talk about thinking and our thoughts, and how our thoughts act as a way of moving us into action or into a deepening of our experience one way or another. And then we can talk about our sensation, and it's like we could talk about it in terms of a painful. I broke my arm when I was 8 or something like that. And you might say, oh yeah, I broke my arm when I was 11. There's all these experiences that are different, but yet as we move more deeply into ourselves, we start seeing the similarity. And then we can start talking about, hey, we're people. We're both people. And we are the same species. And that's one way of kind of moving into that idea.
The recognition of shared experience. We talk in a lot of these videos about how it takes a moment that kind of breaks through all of the sort of the surface noise. I think you might have mentioned maybe you knew someone who was in an office building during an earthquake or something like that?
Oh, yeah.
Or did that happen to you?
That happened to me.
Oh, yeah, because
The big one of 89.
Yeah.
The thing about it that was so touching and interesting to me was that the boundaries between you and me or somebody else over here were gone. And it was like people were just spontaneously coming up to each other, perfect strangers, and saying, where do you work? Oh, you're in that building. Did everybody get out okay? And there was a sense that there was that clear shared specieshood that we have. And it certainly can be shared in terms of trauma, but also in terms of love, in terms of spirituality. I remember several years ago being at a meditation retreat with several thousand people all doing meditation together, and the experience of that many people in the same kind of attitude or the same intention was palpable, and it was just quite amazing to feel the unity on that level.
There are, of course, instances where people are kind of whipped up into a frenzy under different circumstances, say like at a rally, at a sporting event, or something like that. And when I think about it in those terms, thousands of people who've come together, the interesting thing about that situation in particular is that there's several thousand people wearing one color shirt over here, and there's several thousand people over there wearing another color shirt. But yet, with kind of within the groups, I don't know. They have a perception that they're sharing an experience.
Well, absolutely, and they're sharing an energetic experience. What's so interesting about that one is sort of like tennis. Say we're talking about soccer, it's the team over here makes a goal and they're all, yeah. On the other side is sort of, and then one of the groups leaves the stadium full of joy and everything else, and the other group is kind of hanging their heads and we'll get them next time sort of idea. But then there's the idea of everybody coming together like a rock concert or even a lecture, which is a lot quieter, but seeing someone that's highly intelligent and sharing that information together, or a church service, which very well about, there are times where that unity, that sense of unity, comes together in a very deep way.
When we look at, when you talk about the layers of the personal onion, with the social presentation and culture on top, or the historical identity and all that kind of thing, over the common specieshood, is that people aren't unaware of these things, completely, like they touch on corners of it, and they'll use it, cultures or nation states or political parties will use a common energetic experience to mobilize this group of people against that group of people, and it's like it's in that moment they're kind of like half the way there. They recognize, this group of people recognizes that there's something greater than myself.
Yeah.
And yet I'm still in some sense of opposition to the themselves on that other side, without recognizing that below this level of apparent conflict, that there's something greater than ourselves that's underneath the whole thing. But maybe that depth of experience is rare.
Right, and as I mentioned in that little piece, I think that's one of the underlying things that the religions share, in that every religion talks about a deep, deep unity focused towards a deity or towards meditation or something else. But the bottom line in that is that there is this deeper unity that we share. So if we take that idea and we put it into a social idea rather than just a spiritual idea, we come up with specieshood. You can share that individual experience, us, our group, our whatever it may be, and there's that unity is there. So how interesting it is to consider taking that unity and saying yes and to it, and this unity includes all of us. And of course many people don't experience that. There are many people that are very addicted to their individual personality. This is what materialism and individuality do. Me, my life, I'm going to make it, I'm successful, I. And that's, for many of us has been a primary identity structure that's been, pushed into us since the beginning. And how interesting it is to look, particularly since you and I are in Thailand, in a culture that isn't hyper individually identified. It's not that Thai people aren't individuals, but there's a sense of unity that's come around as having a different way of identifying yourself. And think about being in Japan also, since we were both there. So many conversations that I had, and you may have this also, is talking to somebody and them saying, yeah, well, we Japanese, and that assumption that that there's a unity there in that group of people, although they're all individuals also. So it's the paradox. You know, we are separate individuals, but we are also all of the levels of the onion, right down to specieshood, and perhaps deeper than that into spirituality.
My Japanese experience and meeting lots of individuals and talking one-on-one with lots of people is that the collective presentation, you know, I got a little bit of insight into how that's created. Mm-hmm. They felt unified. They felt some people did. Some other people felt the responsibility to the group and were very conscious of the you know, kind of simultaneous personal sacrifice that makes that possible. They did it, but not unconsciously or subconsciously, and not always with a smile on their face. You know, it's an orientation of the way that kind of collective identity and cultural identity is formed and maintained.
Right. So what's interesting about that to me is that if you look at a spectrum of people, you will find those people on the edges that maybe struggle to keep that going on, and those would be the outliers. And then there's other people who have totally identified with that role, and they don't think a second thought of it. Well, of course, I'm Japanese, and we Japanese are black, or whatever it is. It doesn't really matter whether it's a collective experience of a culture or a group or a family. You know, it's like a clan. You know, there are these various levels of identity that we can have, and we've talked about the idea of, one of my teachers mentioned in his first class that most people are dead by the time they're 24, and he was specifically referring to the habituation to an identity that usually occurs by the time you're about 24, 25 years old, and you become a solid experience of yourself. And that experience can either be oriented towards a group or oriented towards an individual or anything in between. And that's where things get real interesting. You know, it's like